Hello and welcome to this edition of Gimme Shelter Security in Azure. Today we're going to talk about some of the advanced features with Azure Active Directory. My name is Dwayne Natwick. I am an Azure MVP and a Cloud Training Architect Lead for Opsagility and Skill Me Up. You can find me on the social media links provided on this slide. So as we've gone through and started to talk about our journey in this series, we've been talking about the defense in depth and zero trust model is what we laid the groundwork with. And the last few videos, we've really been focusing on a lot of identity management and Azure Active Directory, role-based access controls, and things like that. Today, we're going to hit on three key advanced features for managing your zero trust model and your identity management within the Azure Active Directory infrastructure. Some of these features need a premium level subscription with Azure Active Directory. They're not available with the standard subscription that you get when you turn on Azure or Microsoft 365 accounts. But for most enterprises, it's worth it to move into those subscriptions to utilize these features. And these features that we're going to be talking about today are privileged identity management, multi-factor authentication, and conditional access. So just to review the zero trust model and what we mean when we talk about that is that with zero trust, what we're assuming is that every time a user is going to log in, we're assuming that there is a breach, and we need to verify every one of those requests and where it originates to make sure that that person is who they say they are, and we're maintaining the integrity of their identity throughout. And you can see in this chart how that works, and it works within many different scenarios, and it looks at what network they're on, who they are, if they are on an unprivileged network requiring things such as multi-factor authentication, which we'll talk about in a minute. Then many access conditions like location, device state, the application that they're on, or who they are as a user, what their role is within the organization, what the risk is, and what exceptions we're going to take into account for certain users. And then utilizing Azure Active Directory roles, as well as endpoint management or Microsoft Intune to look at what that device state is, making sure the device has all its security patches and things like that. And then we're going to determine what we're going to do. Are we going to block their access? Are we going to allow their access? Are we going to require them to change their password or do another level of authentication with multi-factor authentication? And when we get to conditional access here in a minute, you'll actually see that this flow is very similar to a conditional access policy. So utilizing conditional access policies and multi-factor authentication and privileged access management, all three of these advanced features are going to help us as an organization to enforce this zero trust model and have that verification of identity throughout access to various resources within Azure as well as Microsoft 365. So the next concept that we want to talk about in terms of our zero trust model and our advanced features here is multi-factor authentication. And many of you are probably already familiar with what multi-factor authentication is, and many of you may use it for other services. Multi-factor authentication takes into account a secondary factor other than just a password. And those two factors are generally, everybody has a password for what they're accessing. So that's usually our first factor. It's something you know. It's something in your head that you know and that you provide to log in. And then we have something you have and something you are. Something you have is probably what we use more often than not with multi-factor authentication. We use the authenticator apps on our phones, or we are texted to our phone a authentication code, an authorization code. Those, that is done real time when you provide your password. Those are provided to you. So those aren't PIN numbers that you remember in your head. These are approvals that we are given real time on something we have, which is our phone. Then there's something you are, which is a biometric. So our, utilizing Face ID on our phone or fingerprint on our phone is a form. Our Windows Hello are all forms of that biometric secondary factor of authentication. So, important to know when you're thinking about the something you have is that is not a PIN number like your ATM PIN number. That is something. So the something you have is your phone, and they may be sending you, like Microsoft may be sending you a PIN number that is your authorization code, but the something you have is the actual phone. So to be breached as a user, the person that is threatening your identity needs to know your password and then also have your phone to be able to log in. And we'll look at how to enable MFA in a moment as well. But it is an actual different portal than within the Azure portal. It takes you to the multi-factor authentication administrator portal. You then enable, enforce, or disable multi-factor authentication. And then the users themselves, the next time they log in, it's going to prompt them to set up their multi-factor authentication. So it is something that is a user enabled or user forced login to complete the enrollment process in multi-factor authentication. It is a free service for anybody that has a global administrator role within Azure Active Directory, but to assign it to the general user population, you do need a premium P1 or P2 subscription. And just some quick things here around multi-factor authentication settings. There's capabilities within here for if a user has lost their phone and still needs to get in, you can do a one-time. They can call the help desk, and the administrators can create a one-time bypass just so that they can get into their services while they wait for a new phone and get re-enrolled in multi-factor authentication. You can set up trusted IPs that allow those users that are federated to bypass multi-factor authentication. Example of that is setting up the IP address range of your office, taking into account that your users that are in your office have badged themselves in or something like that. So you don't require that. Probably not the best policy to have in place. You should always, again, use that zero trust model and require that continuous verification of who people are. And then you can have the ability for users to actually report fraud and report fraudulent attempts on their resources that might block that account and lock that account out for while the investigation takes place. So let's talk about now risk events and what risk events are. And we are going to talk about how these risk events now can be utilized and looked at for conditional access policies. And what risk events really are is they help to detect the suspicious activities, and they are looking at things like leaked credentials, anomalous sign-in activities, sign-in from anonymous and unprotected IP addresses, impossible travel from atypical locations. So if you are located in Europe and you log in to your resources in Europe and 15 minutes later you're logging in from the United States, that's impossible travel. There's no way you could have gotten from Europe to the United States in 15 minutes. So something has been compromised within your identity. Sign in from unfamiliar locations, infected devices. So if you have a virus on your device, that's where the endpoint management on that device comes into play. And sign in from, again, IP addresses that have suspicious activity. So it's also going to, it pulls from Microsoft's database, their threat database, and looks at suspicious IP addresses that could cause harm and may have known threats and vulnerabilities, and you can utilize those as well, and those provide levels of risk as well. And from there, then you can create those risk policies based on their risk levels, and you can view the user's risk and view what level of risk they are at. And you can then create policies on there to allow access and require password change if they're at a high risk or medium risk category, or block access completely at those risk levels. So at the foundational level, these are really quick and easy ways to audit and protect our organization. And then next is also looking at sign-in risk and doing the same thing there, requiring multi-factor authentication if they're at a sign-in risk. And if the user does not use multi-factor authentication on a regular basis, we can enforce it and get that and utilize that in that risk event case. And from those standard risk policies and utilizing those, we can also then create conditional access policies. And those conditional access policies, and if you look at this chart, it looks very similar to the zero trust model. We have our signals of risk. We're going to then verify the access attempt using MFA or blocking access, and then we give them access to the apps and data. And the different signals are where they are, the devices, the device compliance, what applications they might be. They could be applications with sensitive data. And then also real-time risk, which comes from those suspicious IP addresses and the Microsoft threat database as well. And when what the conditions are, what those are is the conditions are when this happens. So we're looking at those different things, and many of those conditions, and we'll see some of these in a minute, is users and groups, the cloud applications, what those applications are, what the state of the device is, again, locations, the client applications, and also those sign-in risks that we talked about already. And when those conditions happen, then we provide those actions of what needs to be done. And it might be that, okay, this user is at a certain location that we have verified, so we allow access. But otherwise, we might enforce MFA or we might block access. So let's take a look at these capabilities real quick. So we're in the portal now. So let's take a look at multi-factor authentication, and how we would set up users for multi-factor authentication is within the user environment within Azure Active Directory. And within here, as I mentioned when we were going through the slides, there is a separate portal to enable and enforce multi-factor authentication to users. And when we click on that multi-factor authentication, we go in here and we can create a bulk update. We can view the different administrators if we need to, or just the allowed users. And we can do this for everybody if we wanted to by just selecting the top checkbox and clicking enable multi-factor authentication. I can do it again for just Bart Simpson and click enable multi-factor authentication. It tells you to read the deployment guide just to make sure. If the user does not regularly sign in, you can send them this link here to make them set up multi-factor authentication. If they're already logged in and stay logged in, we want to enforce them to log out, require them to log out to enable that multi-factor authentication. So that's really how quick and easy it is to assign it to a limited number of users or just to assign it to your entire organization right off the bat, and then go from there to get you into that next level of zero trust model. So if we go back to Azure Active Directory, and the last thing that I wanted to look at today is conditional access policies. If I just go into conditional access and go to my Azure Active Directory, conditional access policies, I can very easily, it takes you right there to create a new policy. And we can see here are our assignments on who we're assigning them to, our conditional, our conditions, and then what is going to happen when those conditions are met. So if we want to look at a select group of users and look at users and groups, and let's assign, say I have a sales group in here. So sales is going to be traveling around. They might have risk factors involved. They may not have devices that have been compliant. They may have not done all of their system updates or have gotten a virus somewhere along the line. So we want to protect them. Always a good practice in here to exclude any of your global administrators, just to make sure that they are not if they happen to be in a specific group by just because they're administering that group. We want to exclude any of our global administrators from any conditional access policies. We don't want them to get locked out of their ability to work within the environment. So always good to put you as an excluded user if you're the global administrator and you're creating these policies. Our next set here is, we can look at different cloud applications and include all cloud apps or selected apps, such as, say, Office 365, or let's say we utilize Azure DevOps or any other types of applications we have in here. We can put Outlook groups and things like that, but let's just select Office 365 for now. And what are our conditions? So here we're going to look at, okay, is it our user risk? We configure it as high risk. Users, our sign-in risk, where is our risk? Let's say it's at high or medium. And these are all different conditions now we're putting into play for where, what our actions are going to be on those conditions. Here, we could select a device platform. So if somebody's using a phone rather than a endpoint device that we might be protecting, we can put those on here. We can now figure out, select locations. I don't have any trusted locations right now, but we could put that we could here, instead of putting selected locations here, we could exclude certain trust locations like our corporate headquarters and things like that. So we're going to leave that unconfigured. Here we can have our client, different client apps, as well as the device state. So we can determine what the device state is. And this one you can see, it's important that, you can say that whether it's not hybrid joined and things like that. So we've got some conditions here that we've set up around the users and the device platforms that can be identified within our conditional access policy. And then I have to get out of here. Then we can then grant and determine what we're going to do. So we're going to, we could block access completely. The most logical thing to do is we don't want to block users and have them then calling the help desk with potential issues. But so we can grant access, but we can require certain things, like require a password change. And you can see if that takes place, we might require multi-factor authentication by default, or you can see that becomes a default when you do require a password change. If you notice there, when I clicked the password change, it actually checked that box for me. Or we could just require multi-factor authentication. We can require that device to be marked compliant. Has it got all its updates? We can make sure it's hybrid Azure Active Directory joined. Is it that it's properly joined to our Active Directory domain services? We can require an approved client app or a app protection policy being in place, which is a preview feature as well. Most likely, what you're going to look at is probably the simplest grant access feature is multi-factor authentication. Again, if the user is in a particular high-risk location, requiring a password change is also a good requirement. And like I said, since we are enforcing trust and that zero trust model, for somebody, we're not just going to allow a user, if they have compromised somebody's identity, to change their password without requiring multi-factor authentication. We need to verify who that user is, and that's why when you select that require password change, that multi-factor authentication is automatically triggered within that. Now, the problem that you're going to have with conditional access policies is that you should have enforced among your entire user environment that at least the users in the conditional access policies make sure that they have been enrolled in multi-factor authentication, or there might be an issue that takes place. So after we go through and we set up those policies and provide what is going to take place, we can then turn that policy on. We can set it to report only if we just want to look at activity with this conditional access policy in a short term. We can do that as well, and then we would click create. I'm not going to do that right now, but that would be how we create and configure a conditional access policy, which goes along that same line and that whole zero trust model as all of these pieces do. We're decreasing our attack surface on administrator use with privileged identity management. We're using multi-factor authentication to have users verify who they say they are. And finally, we're using conditional access policies then to identify any risk and then again enforce that zero trust model to verify identities. Thank you very much for attending this episode of Gimme Shelter Security in Azure. I have enjoyed the start of this series, and I hope you have as well. We have one more week where we're going to talk about Azure Active Directory, and I swear after that we'll get into other services, security services within the Azure environment. But again, like I said at the beginning, it's very important that we look deep and wide at identity and access management and Azure Active Directory, because it is a foundational part of security within the Azure ecosystem and the Microsoft 365 ecosystem as we look to protect our organization and shelter our organization from various threats and vulnerabilities. You can find me on the social media links provided on the slide. I welcome you to follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribe to this YouTube channel for future videos that on this series, as well as others as I continue on. Thank you very much and have a great day.